welcome Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. We have maybe some clapping in the background. I'm not sure.
There's about 7,000 people in the studio
at
here.
least. And we are live right now in the Transfer Pizzeria Cafe studios.
The new Transfer Pizzeria studios, which is gorgeous if you have not been here yet.
It's really cool. I think from the sign they salvaged from the old bar that was here to the new bar that they put in, and the art piece of art here on the wall is fantastic.
It looks beautiful. And I had not been here before. I remember the construction, but when you were leading me back here, I was thinking, where is he taking me? And now I know where we are in this beautiful new addition.
So you got a little worried maybe we're leading you somewhere. Cool. So welcome to the Experience Milwaukee podcast. We've got, if you think about the audience, it's comprised of people who don't live here that we're trying to get to come and visit and spend some time, maybe even move and work and live. And so with that, maybe not so familiar with you. Why don't you tell us a bit about your backstory and maybe start with where you grew up and what kind of kid you were? Were you a good student? But give us some backstory.
Well, it's sort of a Milwaukee story in many regards. I grew up right here in Milwaukee. My parents moved here. My mother was actually a World War II widow. Her first husband was killed in the Battle of the Bulge. So she was a 22-year-old widow, went to school in Madison, met my dad, who was from McKeesport, Pennsylvania, and then they moved to Milwaukee and raised me, my brother, my two sisters on Milwaukee's west side. So I grew up on Milwaukee's west side, about 3.5 blocks west of Washington Park. Or for people who don't know, it's about 1.5 miles north of the stadium.
Cool.
That's my neck of the woods, if you will. In fact, this is part of the story. Many years later, I now live about 120 yards from the house I grew up in. And there's a story there as well. But you can see I liked my neighborhood. So I know politicians are supposed to paint this picture of how they rose from the ashes and their life was terrible. I had a Leave It to Beaver childhood. So I can't sit here and say that I had these trials and tribulations because I didn't. I had a wonderful childhood. And on the block I grew up, there probably were 70 kids.
Wow.
And so it was
Wow.
it was kid heaven to grow up on the west side of Milwaukee in the early 1960s. To the point that when I got married and my wife and I had 4 kids and we were living in a 2-bedroom home, I said we should go back and look at the neighborhood I grew up in because it's such a great neighborhood. My wife is from Beloit.
Okay.
And she resisted at first. And she said, "You're already fixated in your childhood. Why would I want to relive your childhood?" But I wore her down. We moved back, and our kids all grew up on the west side of Milwaukee, and it's just a wonderful place to raise a family.
Awesome. And you were grade A student, perfect.
I was a pretty good student. I was one of those students that I'd say more often than not, they said, "You're not working to your potential."
Okay.
But I can't say that I dropped out or anything like that. And in fact, as school went on, from high school to college to law school, I probably did better each step going forward simply because I was maturing. I was growing up and learning that, okay, this maybe I should study a little bit more. But
Right.
but again, I'd love to tell you that I've had these incredible sacrifices in my personal life. I can't make that up. I've had a good life.
And you should be grateful. And so I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and some of the hosts of those shows tell a similar story. And so it's interesting. I think almost in being apologetic about it, I think sometimes when people have a good family, good upbringing,
Well, it would be much
right?
more interesting if I
Right,
had something
right.
interesting to say. But I lost the front tooth in a fight in 6th grade.
Yeah.
And then I lost the same tooth 45 years later at State Fair Park. I think I'm the only person in the history of the state to lose the same tooth in a fight 45 years apart. So maybe that's something to brag about.
Did any nicknames emerge from either of those?
I would
No?
say that I saw the questions ahead of
Yeah.
time, and my favorite nickname was a college job I had working at a Sears warehouse where we unloaded trucks. And I was a skinny guy and stuff like that, and we had to lift these carpets out. And one day we're lifting, and I said, "Okay, are we gonna get the forklift to pick up this carpet, or are we just gonna flex it out of here?"
Mm-hmm.
And from that moment on, my nickname was Flex. And I think when people yelled flex, they'd assume they'd see this bodybuilder turn the
Right,
corner.
flexing.
And that's not who I was, but my nickname was Flex because of joking about picking up a carpet with a machine or flexing our muscles.
Perfect. Now, when I see you, I'll
Think
know.
flex.
I'll know.
Flex,
I'll know.
that's right.
I may not say it, but I'll know. So, just at a high level, what was the path to mayor of Milwaukee?
So again, when I was a little kid, I had an uncle who was a history teacher in Sturgeon Bay, and my mother was sick one summer, very sick. So my brother and I went up to stay with my aunt and uncle, and that was the summer when Medicare was passed. It was a summer when there was a lot going on in the Great Society, and he and my aunt had breakfast with us every day and talked about this stuff, talked about what was going on in Washington, and I found it fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And he also had a book about all the presidents, and so I memorized all the presidents and knew all these facts about the president, and thought, boy, I'd love to get involved in this someday. So that's where it came from, thinking, okay, this is really interesting, and you can really make an impact. And I was 11 years old or something like that, so I always thought in the back of my mind I wanted to do this. Now, my mother, on the other hand, couldn't stand this stuff. Just couldn't stand this stuff to the point.
Anything about politics?
Oh,
or,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and people picking on her son,
Right.
please, not my boy.
Right.
And in fact, when I was in Congress, I had been in Congress a few years, and I was visiting my mother and asked her what she wanted for Mother's Day. And she said, I want you to quit politics. I want you to come home, be a normal person, and raise your family. All those people in Washington, they're nothing but a bunch of backstabbers.
Uh-huh.
And I said, oh, Mom, that's not true. In Washington, they'll stab you right in the chest. And I said that, and there's actually a grain of truth in that I respect, is that it is a field where if it's done correctly, you can have discussions where you agree or disagree, and you just do it looking another person in their eye and tell them, okay, I disagree, and this is why I disagree. And I think if you do that respectfully, I think it really improves society in a huge way. And I think it's one of the things that we're missing right now in government, is that respect, that just a decency and treating people with respect. Everybody wants to be treated with respect, and I think people forget that.
Yeah, and I think, so it's interesting. Over the weekend, I was talking with people about this episode coming up and the discussion with you, and inevitably, what do you think about him? What kind of person is he? And I just said, well, from my experience, I think everything I've seen you do, or conversations I've listened or watched happen, everything really comes from a good place. And so the backstory of how you grew up, it makes a lot of sense, I think. Now
Well, I love what I do, although I swear more than I used to. So that I think that's a function of age. I try not to do it in your microphone.
Right. That'll be good.
I think anytime you're doing something you enjoy doing, I think it just makes it easier. What I say is the people who are doing something they love are the luckiest people in the world.
Right.
And if you can find something that sets your soul on fire, you're lucky. It's just
it's
you're
not
really,
work.
It's
right?
not work.
Right.
You're lucky you can do that to get through life if you're doing something that you can be passionate about. And that's not to say there's not times when you're just shaking your head in disbelief or you're frustrated, and that can happen on a daily basis.
Right.
And the other thing that I say now at this point in my career is I have an inner peace, and my inner peace comes from the fact that I know I can walk into any bar in the city of Milwaukee.
Yes.
And within 5 to 10 minutes, I can find a half a dozen people who know they can do my job better than I can.
Yes.
So it just when you
great
start out
feeling,
on
yeah.
that,
Right.
Yeah, you know that they're willing to tell you, and sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong, and you just think, okay, well, let's try to do what's right for this community.
Right. Amen. So, speaking of that, from your perspective, and just as mayor, and part of your job is to promote Milwaukee. How does that work? What does that mean?
Well, we have a story to tell now, and I think that's important. We have a story to tell because if you go back 8 years, 9 years, 10 years to the depths of the Great Recession, it was tough. It was very tough. But I think we've risen out of the Great Recession and galloped out of it in many ways. We still have challenges, and so I don't want to. This is an upbeat show, and everything is good here, but we still have challenges in the city. We've got too much poverty. We've got neighborhoods where there's public safety concerns and housing concerns. But there's no question that in the heart of the city, there is an economic renaissance that's occurring right now, probably unlike anything we've seen in our lifetime, with all the construction of new buildings, of the new arena, the streetcar, you name it. It's happening in the heart of the city. So it makes it fun to be the cheerleader for all the great things that are going on.
And what's happening, right?
Yeah, what's going on.
Right.
And I do feel confident. I mean, the fact, for example, that we're looking at putting in, or we have put in a bid to host the Democratic National Convention in 2020 tells you we feel that we're there. Now, I'd be saying the same thing if it was the Republican National Convention, so it's not a partisan statement, but I think our community now is at a point where we can say, yeah, come here. We got something to show you. We can entertain you. We can make sure you've got hotel rooms. We can make sure you have things to do. We're proud of our city right now. And again, that's not to cover up the challenges we have, because they're real, but it's to say we've got something positive going here, and we want to keep it going.
And the positivity, I'm sure it's your plan or hope that it spreads, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It makes its wave out to those other areas.
And here's my argument there, and I use the word heart of the city purposefully, because the heart, you have to have a strong heart. Any living being has to have a strong heart. If you don't have a strong heart, it's over.
Right.
So you now that we've gotten our heart stronger, I think it's going to make it easier for us to do what we know we need to do, again, in those neighborhoods where there's too much poverty. And one of the things, and you don't want to make this a political show, so I'll stay away from it, but there's low unemployment now. And so part of my argument has been, look, with low unemployment, this is the time to address these issues, because if you don't address it now, when do you address it?
Right.
So those are all things that keep us going and keep me going and keep me motivated and on fire in terms of trying to make it a better city.
And it's interesting when you think about visioning or future planning for the city as a whole. There's a lot of corporate involvement, and it's picking up steam.
Right.
In some areas, maybe more than others, but there's a lot of commitment to this community.
There is, and we love that, but I want more. I want more.
Of course.
I want us to create jobs. I want us to create jobs in the central city, because right now that to me is one of the most, if not the most important challenge we face. How do we get jobs near where people live? Because people talk a lot about a skills gap, and they're upset because they've got a plant in Waukesha County and they can't get workers. And my reaction is, well, maybe if you had the plant near where the workers are,
right,
it would make a little bit more sense. So just trying to change that thinking is one of the challenges we have.
Awesome. So transitioning into you a little bit more again, and your view of Milwaukee, what do you love most about the city?
What I love to do, and I'm going to do this when I leave here, is I'm going to walk through another neighborhood.
Okay.
And in the summertime, we've done this for the last 4 or 5 years, we try to put together neighborhood walks. And I love doing these neighborhood walks for a number of reasons. One, it gets me out, and you can see the city from a different vantage point, because usually you're in a car, or
and
some
you're
people
flying
on a bus.
through, and right.
And so this is walking with people, and sometimes it's as few as 4 or 5 people. Sometimes it'll be, we had one with Hmong American Peace Academy with 1,000 kids. So it ranges depending on what the neighborhood is. Last weekend we were down on the trail over near the Inner Harbor. There's a rail corridor there. We walked down there with some butterfly people from the museum. Tonight we'll be on the west side. We've been on the south side. We've been on the northwest side. And it's fun. It's fun to get out and do that, especially because for all the swearing we do in January and February about
right.
the weather in Milwaukee, this is the time of year when it's heaven on earth.
It's the best place to be.
It is the best place to be right now.
Agreed. And so, I can't. I don't want to put you in a spot where you're picking your favorite thing. So, I know you have to love everything equally. So we'll leave it at
all
that.
My children, all
your children. Right. So let's shift to maybe your experience in other cities or interactions with other mayors or other leaders in other cities. what are maybe the one or two things you appreciate most about Milwaukee that maybe differentiates or sets us apart? I mean, that could be industry, music, creativity,
Well,
tech.
I mean, the first thing, and I think this is maybe it's not uncommon in other cities, but I live it on a daily basis here. And the phrase I used to describe it is, "We're fighting back." Milwaukee's fighting back because you go back 50 years, and this is for a lot of cities in the Midwest and the Northeast. Some would argue, but those were the heydays of the Midwestern, Northeastern cities because you had all this industry. And what happened is people discovered air conditioning, they discovered screens, and they started moving south and moving west. And we've had this huge migration out of the Midwest and the Northeast. Now, Milwaukee has not lost as much population as a Baltimore, a Detroit, a Cleveland, a Pittsburgh, a St. Louis. But we're down a little bit in the city. But in vis-a-vis the metropolitan area, we're still very strong in terms of our population. So I think that we have held our own. But again, I say this because I don't want anybody to think that my eyes aren't open to the challenges we have in the city. So the real challenge is, how do you move everybody forward? How do you keep things moving forward? And I'm proud of the efforts we've made, but I know we have to do more. I know we can and will do more.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's great that you continue to reference we're not perfect, and we do have areas we need to address, and we will do that, and we will move forward in that process. So even though might be a show of rainbows and butterflies, we can't forget about all aspects of the city of Milwaukee when we talk about what's happening here and how it's happening. So, and
again, I'm very high on the city, and I'm going to remain high on the city because I think our trajectory is good. I think our trajectory is very, very good. And we just have to keep it going. So again, the things that I think we have done a masterful job, and I can't even take credit for this. So it breaks my heart as a politician that I can't take credit for it. What this community has done over the past 100 plus years with our lakefront, for example. You go to a lot of cities, and they allowed their lakefronts to become industrial wastelands and didn't have effective zoning at all. We have done a remarkable job in this community in making sure that our lakefront, which I affectionately refer to as the fresh coast, that we've reserved that for our community.
Right.
Now we're in the process of cleaning up the rivers. And I just had a meeting today about our EPA designation of an area of concern and how we believe that we can take the rivers now, our next significant step, take the rivers and bring them into a place where we can be very proud of them. We've made a lot of progress over the last few decades, but we can do more as well. So those natural resources, I think we're blessed with the natural resources. So that's one thing that I love. I think we've got a very vibrant music scene here. I think we punch way above our weight on theater and stuff like that.
Agreed. The arts, everything.
Yeah, we really do a good job there. And I affectionately refer to Chicago as one of our finest suburbs because I don't have Chicago envy, and a lot of what they have, we've got the same things they do.
But more approachable, right?
But we're much more livable and approachable.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I did for a while take a job in Chicago or Chicago area, and now coming back, I realize what was missing there that I love about Milwaukee, and just walking along the river, walking from restaurant to restaurant, the personality of the neighborhoods. It's just an amazing place.
And I think we have a lot of neighborhoods with great personalities, and we want more. And again, some of this is not accidental because some of it is building the city and trying to have traffic flows or transportation modes so that you aren't just shooting past places. Because that, again, you go back to the 1950s or 60s, the whole goal, it seems, of urban planning was, how do we get people out of cities? How can we get them out of cities in 7.3 minutes? And that had a real negative impact. What you're seeing now, I think, in America, and certainly here, is a reawakening and a reappreciation for cities. And
I agree.
And I think that's really healthy.
And it's happening here, and it has been for a while. And so what is the visual of so visitors come, whether they're here on vacation or for work, and they gravitate toward the downtown. What's the visual there? What's the makeup? Is it
Well,
is
the
it
makeup
young,
and
fresh?
I think it's the way I describe it. Oftentimes, is it's young people and people who are young at heart.
right.
Because again, in an urban experience, you've got to like people,
Mhm.
and if you don't like people, that's not a slam against you. It's just cities are filled with people, and they're filled with human interaction, positive and sometimes negative, and I thrive on that. And if you thrive on that, then that's the right place. If you're a person who really doesn't like that, it's just different strokes for different folks. And then you go to a rural setting or you go to a suburban setting. So I don't pass judgment on anybody, but it's who I am. I like the urban lifestyle.
And I think people and dogs and cats, because I see in more and more places are dog friendly, and even
Yeah.
the cat cafe I think that recently opened that
Yeah.
it's not for me, but
Yeah.
seems like a really cool place. I hear a lot of good things about it, and one of my daughters cannot wait to go to the cat cafe.
Right.
And
And they're always conversation starters, whatever your
Right.
animal is.
Right.
They're great conversation starters.
and it's great. And a lot of the coffee shops are really friendly
Yeah.
around that as well. So cool. Let's do as we start to wrap up rapid fire. So no thinking about it. You just
Okay.
whatever first comes to mind. So favorite color,
Blue.
favorite food,
Hamburgers.
number one hobby right now,
Walking.
walking. Okay, cool. Favorite song.
Thunder Road.
Okay. The audience is really liking these answers.
Okay.
I see. Favorite holiday.
I'm a Christmas guy.
You love it?
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
It's good.
family. It's family. I like it.
Family. It's a beautiful time here, I think,
Yep.
as well in Milwaukee. What is okay?
Oh, now they're getting hard. Now, are we in double jeopardy now?
This is double jeopardy, but still somewhat rapid fire. What's the number one app you enjoy outside of work? So on your phone, what are you doing? What are you using outside of work?
Let's see. My Sudoku.
Okay.
My CBS Sports to see the Brewers scores. YouTube when I want to watch some tunes. I'd
Okay.
say those three get a lot of play.
Are you? Do you do fantasy football or fantasy
I don't
sports? or
do
anything?
fantasy.
Not
No
yet?
fantasy sports. No
Okay.
fantasy sports. So
Okay.
I'm a sports fan, but
Respect that.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of last minute last thoughts here.
Now we're in Final Jeopardy.
Final
Okay,
Jeopardy.
okay.
How do you see, or what is the future of the city? What's on the horizon for Milwaukee?
We are going to emerge as a new Portland, a new Denver. More people are going to discover this city because we got good bones here. We've got good people here. We've got a reasonable cost of living, and there are going to be a lot more opportunities.
Awesome. And then just a good question overall. How do people connect with you? How do they get in touch with your office, or if they want to get engaged?
Your best bet is to go on one of my walks because you get absolute service when you go on one of the walks.
Stalk the walk.
Stalk the walk.
Yeah.
That would be the best way. But
Okay.
otherwise, let us know. I'm a pretty approachable guy.
Okay. Awesome.
All right?
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Steve, and to the thousands of people here,
Yes.
the studio band. It's been amazing.
All right.